I'm just, yes, thank you. And the, the recording is in progress because this will be put on our YouTube station. And our YouTube station is Maleficete Asante Institute Lectures. And these lectures are will normally be posted if they're not streamed, as this one is not. They will be posted on that channel. Let me just tell you that we are really happy to be able to have this Zoom session because we had been planning for our station, our channel, to have it, but we are now still trying to align the technical equipment from the station to our Wi-Fi, which has increased its capacity and its speed. And we're just trying to align the cameras and all of that. So that will be coming up. But in the meantime, we're very happy to have Zoom. And we're also very delighted to have the speaker that we have today. The Maleficete Asante Institute was established as a think tank, basically. And COVID has sort of set us a little bit back, but not too far back. And we have still been operating, but we have not been operating as a in-person institute, but we will be doing that very soon. Hopefully in June, we will announce the date of our opening. We do recognize that Odun Day in Philadelphia, which is a very big holiday and a very big festival, one of the largest African festivals in the nation, is held here in Philadelphia every year. And it would probably be around Odun Day's time that we will open up, but we will let you know more about that as we go forward. But we can say that for over 400 years, African people have lived in the United States of America. Actually, we lived in this country before it was the United States of America. We were here before the government was here. And all of that time that we have spent that time understanding that we were in a vice, not in a VICE, but in a VISE. And that vice had its seeds, the virus of that vice had been created and put in place because of those who wanted to control not just our labor, but also our brains and our minds. The idea had always been in Western culture, since the encounter with darker skinned people, was how to make of us people who were basically Eurocentric in our brains and minds, even though we remain in our bodies African. That was one of the big ambitions, the mission of the whole notion of the, as it was interpreted by the French as civilizing the world, and of course by the British and the Scots particularly, as somehow bringing culture to people who were considered savages and barbarians. So now we are looking at this contemporary time in the world at what is going on in Ukraine and Russia. And we'll probably more focus on that because these are European people slaughtering each other. But there has been slaughter for as long as I can remember being alive. There has been slaughter. And certainly right now, the people in Yemen are being slaughtered. We have seen periodic rises and falls of the slaughter in Palestine. We have also seen slaughter happening on the continent of Africa, whether it was in Ethiopia or whether it was in Rwanda, Burundi. We have seen these things happen. So the question of race and the question of how to deal with this concept that was fostered upon intellectual knowledge as well as practical behavior has been at the root of many of the inquiries of African people. And at Temple, we certainly have had that inquiry. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Erasing Racism. It was very optimistic, the survival of the American nation. And I wrote that after, of course, Randall Robinson had written the very powerful book called The Debt, what America owes to Black people. So now we are fortunate because through an initiative that I instituted with the previous president of Temple University, a man by the name of Richard Englert, we were able to secure the Center for Anti-Racism Research at Temple. And when members of the faculty looked around and started thinking about somebody who could direct this in a very mature way and give it leadership, it was very, very easy for us to immediately say that the person who should lead the Center for Anti-Racism Research should be Timothy Welbeck. Dr. Timothy Welbeck has a JD. He is also a graduate of Morehouse College in Atlanta, but he has his JD from Villanova University here in Philadelphia. But what we were attracted to in Dr. Welbeck is that he had been an adjunct professor for almost 10 years or more at Temple University, one of the most highly evaluated professors in the university. And we appreciated that, but we also appreciated his research and his writings and his deep understanding of fighting discrimination. He's been a human rights attorney, always fighting and defending the oppressed. So we are really delighted today to have him here on April the 10th, 2022, speak to us and give us his overview. He is the acting director of the Center for Anti-Racism Research at Temple University, a very, very important intellectual and a very, very brilliant young man. So this time, we're going to turn it over to Timothy.
Dr. Asante, thank you for that gracious invitation. I need to have you introduce me everywhere I go. That I do greatly appreciate your tremendous support and encouragement during my tenure here at Temple University. As I often tell you, as I began my journey as a scholar, you were required reading, you are still required reading, you are the father of our discipline. I owe a world of thanks to you for not only paving the way for this moment that we have here now, but also giving us the guide to do that. And so I appreciate this opportunity to not only speak at your institute, but also to serve under your leadership. With that said, I also would just like to acknowledge my colleagues. I'm here from the Department of Africology and African American Studies. I am grateful for you all as well. And with that said, I do want to spend a few moments talking about this moment that we're in, particularly this moment where we have a Center for Anti-Racism Research. And if you don't mind, I'm going to take a step back to remind us of how we got here. And with that said, I think they shot Breonna. That's what Kenny Walker frantically exclaimed in a phone call to Tamika Palmer in the early morning hours of March 13th, 2020. Tamika Palmer was dazed at first to have gotten a call from Kenny Walker, particularly at the hour that she received it. And she was even more alarmed by what she heard on the other end. Who is they? And why would they shoot Breonna? The whole scene was befuddling to her, and it was befuddling to Kenny Walker as well. But as he was able to describe it, there was a banging at the door of the apartment that Kenny shared with his beloved Breonna. He called out to the people and demanded that they identify themselves. They did not. And he, believing that there were intruders trying to break into their domicile, fired warning shots. And then a hail of bullets returned, 22 at least, 8 of which, rifled through the frame of Breonna. And she lay on the floor, exasperated and shaking, convulsing from the pain and trauma from what she felt. All the while, people on the outside were screaming, "Come out," and Kenny Walker had no idea what to do. Many of us have become familiar now with the story of Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old essential worker working 2 jobs in the height of the pandemic, who had dreams of becoming a nurse, who shared an apartment with her fiance, and they had plans to get married, buy a home, and start a family. And that life of hers was snuffed out from her callously by members of law enforcement who had sworn a duty to protect her. And it was the outrage of the murder of Breonna Taylor and the cruel and gruesome murder of George Floyd, the savage lynching of Ahmaud Arbery, that jolted our nation into a new sense of consciousness, an awakening, a reckoning, if you will, whereby we began to see the largest recorded response, the largest recorded protests in all of our nation's history. And many of us rightfully linked these savage murders that awakened us to our painful legacy of slavery. And in that moment, much of our nation began to talk about how we could begin to actively remedy that harm. For decades, we had looked at various components and strategies and solutions and different remedies. And in my field, we called that civil rights litigation, and we looked at how we could make the Constitution be true to what it said on paper, in the words of Dr. King. And in other fields and professions, we looked at ways in which that we could bring about some form of equality, if not something approaching equity. But all of our nation began to vow to do different, to see different, to be different, and to honor the dignity and the humanity of Africans in America. And we began to see celebrated works by people like our own Dr. Ibram Kendi, Stand from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist, began to top New York Times bestsellers list and become household names and the like. And we began to see a pledge of action. And it was in that window of time, just like Dr. Asante said, that there came a call from in the house at our specific university to do more than have words. We'd heard words before. There came a call to bring about action and to meet action with words. Social change is slow, but it always responds to agitation. That's what Dr. Asante and Dr. Dove, that's how they began their brilliant book, Being Human Being, where they talk about moving beyond the race paradigm. And in this moment that I'm speaking about from 2 summers ago, agitation was happening here from the leadership of our department, calling for our university to do something more. And in that, we got the pledge to create the Center for Anti-Racism Research. We got renewed efforts, at least in word, to meet action with the promises and the anti-racism statements that our university published. But in many ways, our goal here at the center is to correct centuries of harm. And beyond correct centuries of harm, our goal here is to move beyond the race paradigm. Essentially, we are all humans trying to be human beings, being as humans be, so to speak. Race is a biological illusion. Dr. Asante and Dr. Dove mentioned that brilliantly in their new book, and they talk about how all the history of science has confirmed that. The history of the world has looked at how all of us people come from the same point in Africa, and how we eventually made a migration from Africa throughout the rest of the world and began to populate it. But Homo sapiens come from the same place. And the differences between us, the categorizations, the classifications that we often use are fictitious. They are social constructs. They are imaginary classifications that have been used to dole out privilege, power, benefits to some, and disenfranchisement to others. And with that, these categorizations, they're malleable, they're flexible, and they bend in ways that are convenient over time. So that there are some groups who fall outside of the purview of the empowered group, and then over time they find themselves within the consideration, within somewhere approaching the box. What I mean by that is this. We often talk about ourselves within the categorizations of these boxes, these classifications. When we have to fill out government documents, we're asked to check a box. How do we identify as our race? What is our identification? Are we Black? Are we Hispanic? Are we white? There are these various categories that we see that have been developed over time that have very real and lasting social and political impacts, but they have no bearing in any type of science or any type of real history. But these classifications, they emerge in such a way that they paint and frame our identity, into some way, even the trajectory of our advancement within society. And we often are introduced to these concepts very early. I often tell the story of the first time that I realized that the world would call me Black. I was a 5-year-old in my kindergarten class. And my teacher, Mrs. Crowder, came to us and told us that she wanted us to draw a self-portrait. And she brought to us sheets of paper, bins of markers, boxes of crayons and color pencils, and told us to draw ourselves. And at the time, I loved art and I wanted to draw an accurate depiction of myself. And so my hair is brown, and so I found a light brown and I began to color my hair. My eyes are green, and I found a light green that was approaching the hue of my eyes, and so I colored that in. And I found a peach crayon that was closely matching the color of my skin, and I began coloring that in. And I looked back and thought I had a masterpiece, and I was waiting for the time for Mrs. Crowder to ask us to show our portraits to the rest of the classroom. And shortly before that moment occurred, a young man next to me said, "You're not white. Why are you using the peach crayon? You're Black. You should use this." And he handed me a black crayon. And in that moment, I realized not only was he not speaking to something literal, but that the classification, the category that he was lumping me in was something that spoke to something broader, a caste, an othering of who I was. And it's from there I began to understand even Du Bois's notion of double consciousness and having to measure my soul by the tape of another. And I say that because I say that these classifications, these categories are malleable, they're fictitious, they're arbitrary, because you can look at me and tell that a black crayon is not an accurate depiction of the hue of my skin and the pigmentation therein. But we associate and have associated something with that. And it comes from taking proud Africans who were people who circumnavigated the globe and found the alignment of the planets and introduced the world to mathematics and to religion and various other forms of technology and societal advancements. Africans were taken, made to be property and handled like merchandise, and crossed the Atlantic and not only told it to be merchandise, but that their children and their children's children would be merchandise as well. We've had this conversation for centuries, and this conversation has become emboldened and re-enlivened with various works like the 1619 Project and 400 Souls that seeks to capture the 400-year anniversary of Africans being made to be property brought over by the White Lion in August of 1619. But it's there that these fictitious constructs began to forge out caste in our nation. And we began to see, even before we were a nation itself, that this thing, this blackness, this category, this title was a means in which to relegate us to the bottom of the racial ladder, as Dr. Asante has framed it. This racial stratification then put those who imagine themselves or call themselves to be white at the top and those who are Black at the bottom. And the closer one could approximate themselves to whiteness, the more benefits and privileges and power they can enshrine themselves with. And this process began to unfold clumsily at first, but we have records that the laws in Virginia by the 1640s had codified people's understandings of these distinctions. And there since, all of our societal institutions have been impacted by this pernicious classification. And it's even why today we speak about race with this binary of black and white, despite the fact that we have a host of other potential classifications that might find their ways in between. It's because of this idea of Africans being made to be property. And throughout the course of this time, those who were stamped from the beginning, as Ibram Kendi references, or those who were said to be nobody, have resisted and fought against not only these categories in these boxes, but the dehumanization that came with it, and said that we will define ourselves, we will remember who we are, from which we came, and though our names have been taken from us, our language has been taken from us, we have been told to pray to different gods and to sing the songs of different gods, we still remembered who we were and found ways to resist and found ways to remind ourselves of our humanity. And we did that both in resisting the institution of slavery itself. We did that also with even the ways in which we communed with each other. And over time, these various struggles have taken on different names and different iterations, but ultimately it's been the same struggle, from saying, ain't I a woman, I am a man, to saying now we want to fight the fight of anti-racism. All of these struggles are interconnected. And the agitation that we're seeing and have seen in recent memory comes just from that, saying that we want to honor the dignity and the humanity, affirm the humanity, not only of Africans, but of all people. Because the more we play into these fictitious categories and classifications, the more we circle the race paradigm, the more we feed not only into it, but the more we disempower ourselves, and the more we dehumanize others by trying to place them and fit them into these boxes and these categories. And with that, that is what we're doing at the Center for Anti-Racism Research. I imagine many of you have gathered today to hear what some of our vision for the center is. And I want to share some of that with you now, and then continue this conversation that we're having. But essentially, our core mission at the Center for Anti-Racism Research at Temple University is to dismantle racial hierarchies. For the entirety of the time that this nation has existed, we've had this racial stratification that I've talked about. Before our nation was a nation for 150 years, we knew this form of chattel slavery, this race-based institution that dehumanized people and their children and their children's children in perpetuity. It stripped them of all autonomy and all forms of their humanity. And that system has found its way into every conceivable facet of American life, from medicine to science to the law itself, to every conceivable form of human interaction has been impacted by this very phenomenon. And so we want to begin by changing the discourse, by moving beyond the race paradigm and dismantling racial hierarchies. And we not only intend to do that, but we want to help to bring the public alongside with us as we do this. We want to fortify the public's understanding of what it is that we're talking about and make this to be more than just an academic exercise. This isn't just an opportunity for us academics to write journal articles and books and to produce studies. That's important. But beyond that, we want the people to understand what we're talking about, because much of what we're talking about is intuitive. These are things that many of us have lived out and seen manifested in our daily lives. I've seen it not only in my personal life, but even in my professional life, as Dr. Asante mentioned in my introduction. But many of us have as well. And so we want to help to bring about the public's understanding of what it is that we're doing, but also bring them alongside us as we're working towards solutions. We also want to work directly with our community and our stakeholders to help them understand that we don't want to just talk about the work of anti-racism, but we want to be about doing the work of anti-racism. Dr. Ibram Kendi has talked about it's not good enough to not be racist, so to speak, but we have to work towards dismantling racism, particularly as it manifests in our institutions and our structures, so that it's more than just a personal value that we may hold, but it's a way in which that we can strip the power of racism as it manifests in various institutions in different iterations. And so we're looking at ways that we can work directly with our community and use some of the vast resources of our university to work directly towards our community and work directly with community stakeholders and organizers and activists to begin working on various forms of anti-racism work, whether that's doing various community-based education work, whether that's mentoring our local youth, whether that's partnering with public safety campaigns, or whether that's partnering with public health campaigns. We're looking at ways that we can go about finding ways to unravel and undo, to remedy the harm that racism has found in our community. And in the process of doing that, we will have not only a means in which to have tackled some of these ideas at their core, but we also will have had an opportunity to be better informed as we make policy and present solutions. As we make policy recommendations and present solutions, we can be able to say that we have worked closely with these various forms and iterations to tackle the pervasiveness of these issues in our day. And so that is the broad work that we envision as it relates to the Center for Anti-Racism Research. We look about doing this work in 3 phases: to do traditional scholarship that will shape the discourse and center particularly Africans in the pursuit of honoring the humanity and dignity of all people, to help the public understand what we're doing and bring them alongside us as we're doing this important work. And then most importantly, to do the work of anti-racism by working with our community. And in that process, being present and working towards unraveling these various systems and forms of oppression as they manifest themselves both in our community and then again across the nation and across the world. So I do want to make this be a conversation. I intend to address some of these things a little more succinctly, but I would love to potentially answer questions that some of you who have gathered may have about the center itself, about anti-racism, the work itself, some of the things that we have envisioned as well. And so if you have questions for me, for the center, if there are ways that I could potentially answer some of those questions, I would love to do so. You can put them in the chat, you can raise your hand, but I want to give space to talk with you rather than at you, because one of the things that we envision for the center, again, is to work with our various people. We want to work with anyone who is about this work itself: faculty, staff, students, community stakeholders, because this is a problem, this is a nexus of problems that we can only solve together. And with that, I'd love to hear from you, talk with you, and again, answer questions that you may have before I continue forward.
And I would like to ask Toyosi Abadaran actually to moderate the questions for us, if you would, Toyosi.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Dr. Welbeck, for your wonderful talk. I'm sure there are many who have questions and comments. So at this time, if you have any questions that you would like me to read, you can either put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and you can ask Dr. Welbeck. I see a hand from Coleman Holmes. You can unmute yourself if you would like, or I can unmute you for you.
Okay, good afternoon, and Professor Welbeck, thank you very much for your presentations. I'm just curious as to how we can begin to look at means of addressing the damage emotionally that has been done to those of us who've been victimized by this false ideology and hierarchy.
Mr. Holmes, that is a great question, and I appreciate you asking it. It's an issue like this is one of the ways that I think that is best solved or addressed by this approach that I mentioned to you. In that, so we have a vast array of brilliant minds at the university, many of whom have studied racism from various angles and disciplines and vantage points. And so when you're looking at the psychological toll, there are already members within our university who are studying particularly psychology and various other forms of mental health, and who have talked about wanting to partner with us and look at the toll of racism, particularly as it's had on people, both past and present, and do studies with that. And so something that we could potentially do is partner with them in doing some of the studies that they're doing, present some of their findings to the public, while also finding ways to use some of our resources to even offer mental health services to people who have been traumatized by the legacy of racism in America. One thing that my legal practice has demonstrated time and time again is that the law in and of itself is limited in its scope to repair the harm that people face. We often talk about solutions that the law offers as a remedy. That's the legal term that is often offered, but the remedy is incomplete. And much of it is going to require more than monetary awards or various sanctions and the like, but it's going to have to deal with actually helping people deal with the actual toll itself. And so I think part of it too is even, Mr. Holmes, just even identifying the need itself. And that's one of the things that I think that partnering with other scholars is going to help us do, to look at the vast nature of what is in front of us and looking at various components to address it. An analogy that I gave just really briefly, and I see some more questions have come up in the chat. An analogy that I gave at our ceremony where we were talking about the construction of the center was that when the world was plagued by smallpox, the world had been plagued by smallpox for centuries, but we made a decision collectively as a global community to rid the world of smallpox. And it took a number of decades, and scientists from various fields, infectious disease, virologists, epidemiologists, and the like came together looking towards solving the issue itself. And it took time, it took commitment, it took resources. And ultimately by 1981, we mostly had rid the world of smallpox. And I look at racism in the same way. We have to first identify not only its symptoms, some of which you have just identified, but also looking at how are some of the ways that we can go about approaching it at its core, and begin to use various resources and commitments to unravel it. So I hope I answered your question. That was a long answer.
Yes, you did. And I just hope that we continue to look at the emotional damage and repairing that emotional damage, because I think that if we do that, we will become more effective agents of our own to be able to resolve this issue.
I think you're exactly right. And that's something that I personally want to work towards, particularly just having met individuals over the course of my legal practice who have been uniquely harmed by various components of racism, whether it's police brutality or racial profiling or workplace discrimination. That's one of the things they often look to first and mention, the emotional toll, and how not only dehumanizing, but humiliating this is, and how the toll is long lasting and moves even well beyond the actual incident itself.
All right, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm
Yes,
getting
there's like a gang of
few-
questions in the chat.
a few questions in the chat. So I'm going to take two from the chat, and then Brother Carm, I see your hand. So we'll come to yours right after. But the first question is, will the center be developing a publication to produce writing directly related to this type of work?
Yes, so the answer to that is we're working on a direct answer to that right now. The hope is either that the center itself will have its own journal where that it will produce scholarship through, or that we will do special editions with existing journals as they are. We're finalizing answers to that as we speak, but the hope is that we will regularly publish work around a robust research agenda as it relates to anti-racism research, and then find ways to distill that and present it to the public in a way that's more digestible. And so like I've envisioned things like TED Talk style lectures or instructional videos or social media campaigns that can help to explain what is mentioned in some of our publications, because sometimes this work can be a little dense. And so while it's important to present it in a way in which it is found, I think it's still important to also to interpret it for the public's understanding. And so that is the hope, that we will have a publication of some sort, that we will regularly put out research findings and also various forms of insightful articles that will help shape the course of the discourse as it relates to this. We've already begun talks with faculty members across the university about how they can contribute to that. And we've already begun looking at potential areas for studies that we can begin potentially as early as the fall. And so we're looking to finalize some details with the center itself before we can announce some of those partnerships, but that's something that's in the works as we speak.
All right, thank you. Another question from the chat says, in working with communities, how do we avoid this work being sidetracked or hijacked by other movements that don't center the liberation of Black people as the primary goal? What are your thoughts?
That is a great question. And I think the most direct answer is that we have to keep the liberation of Black people at the forefront of our research agenda at all times, and remember the reason that the center was created, and remember the reason why the Department of Africology is steering this initiative in and of itself. It's about the agency of Africans and moving towards victory. And so we have to look at it within that way and understand that. And as it relates to working with the community, my goal is to work with people who already have that in mind. So anybody that we're partnering with, whether it's at the faculty level, staff level, student level, community stakeholder level, I want a demonstration that they have already had a commitment to the work before the center came along. And for me, that's the best way to ensure that they're about doing the actual work rather than doing something that's popular in the moment. Because our commitment to this is to do the work until it is done. There will become a moment where anti-racism is not the topic du jour in academia, and we will still be committed to doing the work then. And so, Adrian, I think that's an excellent question, and that's one that's been at the forefront of all of our minds, particularly Dr. Asante and Dr. Dove from the very beginning, about ensuring that the center does not lose that focus. And so that's something that we're going to maintain throughout all of our work.
All right, excellent question, excellent responses. I see Brother Carm.
Hi, Brother
Yes,
Carm.
yes.
Brother Carm, we're actually having trouble hearing you. You might be muted.
It's either
Can
that
you
or
hear me now?
Yes.
All right, excuse me for the wind. I'm sorry about that. I didn't realize it's gonna be windy out here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, I'll be quick. The question I have is really about the moment that we're in. And thank you for highlighting the Being Human, Human Being, excellent book. And in the moment that we're in with what's going on with so-called anti-CRT, critical race theory fabrications, where they're attacking a lot of the same authors and writings that you're talking about and that we're talking about. I think it's very interesting. And I would just analogize it. It's kind of like we're talking about this anti-racism, building this irrigation system to give this anti-racism water to our people. But these folks are talking about going earlier and poisoning the well within K through 12 before they even get into higher education and other parts of the community. And so my question is, how are we looking at anti-racism in these earlier areas, right? Like K through 12, because again, they're poisoning the well. And a recent study came out by a writers organization that said there's over 1,000 books that have been banned
Yes,
all over the country.
by 16 different
1,000
states.
books.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so how are we looking at that early stage? Because again, they're trying to poison the well before we even get to irrigate our people.
Brother Carmen, that's an excellent question. I'll try to be succinct. So the first thing that we're trying to do is to prepare future educators who will be working with primary and secondary students. And so some of the work that we'll do is helping train educators going into these various institutions, particularly in the state of Pennsylvania, but across the country as well. Additionally, we are going to and have already been advocating for some of these anti-history bills that are called anti-CRT bills. And we've already done an event talking about critical race theory and the manufactured moral panic around that, and how it's a deliberate mischaracterization and propaganda campaign. And so we will continue to do that to the extent it's necessary, but we will not be distracted by things like that. We want to continue advancing our work. And part of the way that we'll go about doing that is preparing educators, at times informing the public better about what is happening. We have some good connections to some of the state legislators who are at the table with some of the things that are happening in Pennsylvania as we speak. I'm fortunate enough to have a good working relationship with some of them, as is Dr. Asante as well. And so we have their ear. And so part of what we'll do as some of these things try to come our way is to make sure that we're advocating for accurate presentations of what is happening in life, and ensuring that the well isn't poisoned, so to speak, as you mentioned. And then lastly, too, we're looking at finding ways that we can do some community education programs for local youth as well. I know that we would stand to benefit from them receiving some of the education that happens within the halls of our department. We want to be able to give that to some of these students at the primary and secondary level, especially students who attend schools in the area of Temple. And so that's one of the projects that we're proposing right now. We've got a proposal in the works as we speak, as it relates to this particular issue. Brother, look like you got a response. Let me
No, that's all very responsive. Thank you, Professor Welbeck. I just want this one foundation I forgot to mention, because somebody mentioned that CRT is not really what we're talking about or something to that extent. I just want to be clear. This is allegedly CRT. So really they're just using this moniker. And so they're including things like Afrocentricity, things like being human being, things like everything. They're banning Dr. King. They're banning Maya Angelou, right? They're banning books about Rosa Parks. So they're banning that. You can imagine what they're trying to do to the kind of books we're talking about. So it's basically all inclusive. So it's not really critical race theory by, Professor Bell and Crenshaw. They're talking about anything Black that makes me feel uncomfortable. That's what the law basically says.
That's exactly what these laws are doing. Particularly the law that was passed in Alabama and Texas recently, specifically do exactly what you're talking about. But all of this was a manufactured panic that's directly in response to the uprisings that happened in 2020, when much of this anti-racism research and books became popular and household names. There was an immediate response, and one of the perpetuators of this propaganda, Christopher Rufo, he's one of the leaders of this movement, began that year. He began in September of 2020, trying to unravel some of these trainings and teachings that were happening. And so one of the things that we want to do is be able to combat that, but we don't want to be reactionary. We want to continue to be able to do the work that is in front of us and to do it in a way that is substantive and impactful and be ahead of the curve, so to speak. We do know that there are things that we'll have to respond to, particularly as these types of threats come in our midst. But we want to make sure that we're leading the charge as it relates to these types of things and making sure that we're not distracted by every manufactured propaganda campaign that emerges. But thank you for that question. That was a great question.
All right, I'll take two more questions. I see two more in the chat. Looks like we have time for that, depending on the responses.
I'll try to be succinct.
You've been doing great, so. All right, the first question, how do we get to move forward from those who just want to remain in a space of blaming Europeans, Arabs, and others that have victimized and harmed African people?
I think the beginning to that is of what is articulated in Dr. Asante and Dr. Dove's book, Being Human Being. I keep mentioning that book because I believe that it's a great framework for much of the work we want to do right now, and moving beyond the race paradigm and acknowledging people as people. We have to acknowledge the history that has led to the moment that we're in right now because we're a product of it. So I think we can't escape talking about the European slave trade and the Arab slave trade and what it's done to not only strip Africans of their agency, but also of Africa's vast resources. We have to talk about that. But I think ultimately, once we reckon with that and work towards building solutions towards the harm created from that, the ultimate goal is to get people to be recognized as people. And that's why moving beyond the race paradigm is so important, because if we keep being relegated to these boxes and these classifications, every time they amend, every time they're modified, we're going to be reacting to this new phase when really we can be leading the charge forward. So I'm going to sound like a broken record, but if you don't have Being Human Being, I'd recommend it to everyone in the chat. Everyone who's here today, please go get the book. I think it's one of the most important books that's been written in recent years for that very reason, because much of the work in this area is reactionary. And if you're reactionary, you're always going to be behind what's happening. And I think we have to be in the front of the discourse. And that's what books like this are doing. And so that would be my answer to that, that we have to move beyond the race paradigm, but still be cognizant of what led us to being in this moment.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you. So another question from Adrian says, how can we maintain our agency, but leave room for non-Black people to engage in this work in their own communities?
That's a great question. I mean, the short answer to that is non-Black people who want to do this work need to demonstrate a commitment to not only acknowledging African agency, but also just a commitment to being a verified ally. I think too often people will say the right things in the moment and we quickly exalt them in the hope of enlisting allies. But for me, for our partnerships need to be, for our partnerships with non-Black people have to be with people who have demonstrated that they're about doing the work and committed to doing the work and not trying to get in the way of our leadership. And so those who are trying to usurp our leadership, or again, are trying to hop on the hot trend in academia, those are people that we say, thank you for your enthusiasm, but we have something else going right now. But I think the foremost battle is maintaining our agency, because this is an initiative that came out of the leadership of this department. That's why we began this discussion the way it began. Dr. Asante and the leadership of this department said that enough is enough. This university has said things before. It's time to meet action with words. Now that there's a commitment in place, we need to steer this because this is a response to the leadership. And when I say that, I'm talking about Dr. Asante was leading this effort. Some of our graduate students also wrote letters to the then administration at the time. So I want to make sure I acknowledge that, because Toyo was a part of that initiative as well, leading our graduate students in terms of saying that the university is overlooking the people who are on the bottom rung of the totem pole, so to speak, of our power structures. And that's a part of the anti-racism work too, about being equitable in the treatment of all people within the university structure. And so it was that moment that led to the moment that we're in now. And so like, as we're moving forward, the people who were a part of that movement early on are the people that we want a part of the leadership of what we do going forward. And if people can't get with that, God bless you, but you're going to have to wait a little bit, because this is really about the urgency of what's in front of us at the moment.
All right. And we are going to end with, I see one hand up from Think Q, I believe. So you can be our final question.
Thank you. My name is Joyce, actually. Some technical stuff going on that it comes up in queue. I don't know.
All right.
But I was just wondering, appreciating all that has been said, I think this is a definitely great venture to have taken on, and always applaud Dr. Sante and Dr. Dove for their work and their scholarly effort. Have you encountered some resistance, and am I hearing you say how have you addressed some of the resistance you've encountered thus far so as not to alienate, folks and further increase a divide or create a, divide, but how can we manage to keep folks fit so they're in the loop, they're involved and not create a lot of more tension amongst our people?
Could I
Yes.
help answer that, because I don't want to get you in any situation right now. If I may,
Dr. Sati, please.
I'm in
Hey,
enough
Dr.
trouble.
Sanchez.
Hello, how you doing? I'm in enough trouble. So let me
Oh,
answer.
you're in trouble already?
No, I'm good. Let me just answer
Good
that
trouble.
for him. So because he's doing a great job. Dr. I mean, Dr. Welbeck is a marvelous, not just intellectual, but activist, and he's doing a great job organizing people on the campus and in the community around his ideas about the center. And that's a wonderful thing. We're very happy to have that. But initially, I'll just say this. Yes, we did have some tentative, some small opposition, but we always knew that with the stakeholders that we had in the community, and we do have, and we have to mention people like Senator Street and State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. They have been very, very, very supportive of us. The city council people have been supportive of us. And the state representatives, other state representatives, and Senator Vincent Hughes have also been very supportive of this initiative, and that's a beautiful thing. And the students generally in our department have been extremely forthcoming, as well as members of the faculty. So we have a pretty strong phalanx of people who are engaged and involved in this. So we don't expect that the resistance or any resistance is going to overcome the will of the people at this moment. I mean, we did get $1.3 million from the state to help us with this center at Temple. And then initially, the university itself had also put out around $3 million to help us build the center. So it's being built as we speak in the Anderson Hall, or what is now Mazur Hall. So there have been some, there's some people who didn't want it. I mean, there are some departments who thought that Africology and African American studies shouldn't have it, that why should they have it? Well, and we said, well, we should have it because we initiated it. We were the ones who spoke up for it. After the murder of George Floyd, we didn't hear people in political science and philosophy and economics or English or history speaking up that we ought to have some response. It was us. We did this. So that's the thing that we have to fight. And I think I really appreciate what Professor Welbeck has said regarding how we have to assert humanity. You see, when part of what happens with the race paradigm is that most people of European descent in this country assume a superiority when they meet with Black people. I don't care who you are. You could be Ketanji Jackson Brown, but they assume they know more than you, which they don't necessarily know more than you do, as she's demonstrated. But you get you get ignorance, because ignorance is based on the race paradigm. So we have to always break down the race paradigm and say, you're nothing but a human being just like me. And in fact, the original human beings, Homo sapiens, come from the African continent, and all of y'all have African DNA. So you have to do that, because that's how we assert ourselves. So I just want to thank you everybody for attending. I want to apologize for this not being a stream, but it will be on the YouTube channel, Malefe Kete Asante Institute Lectures. and you could go and find it there. And I just want to say one other thing. I really appreciate the graduate students who did write letters to the president after my letter in June of 2021. And that was making a very, very powerful statement. And we really appreciate all of that. We appreciate the community. And we do have, I want to make a separation so that people in their minds will have this clear. There is no convergence between the Center for Anti-Racism Research and the Malleable Asante Institute. Those are two different organizations. The Malleable Asante Institute is a private, non-partisan organization, not-for-profit organization that's a think tank in the community, only supported by private contributions, gets no government money, is not getting anything from Temple, not getting anything from the Pennsylvania government or the federal government. That's the Malleable Asante Institute. The Malleable Asante Institute can host people from the Center for Anti-Racism Research. We can host people from Ibram Kendi's center in Boston University. We can host ambassadors. We have hosted foreign ministers. We have hosted Samir Nkrumah. All of this can be done on our platform as we're doing today, as we are hosting Dr. Welbeck, but he is from the Temple University Center for Anti-Racism Research. And I just want to make that clear, because sometimes people want to say, well, is the Malleable Asante Institute getting any resources from Temple? No, not at all. The only thing with the Malleable Asante Institute and Temple is that I am there. That's all. I am at both. I'm at Temple as a professor, and I am at the MKA Institute as president. But that institute is itself a separate think tank in the African-American community. So I wanted to say that. And I also wanted to ask people, if you want to donate to the Malleable Asante Institute, you can do that by going to our website, which is, you have to put the MKAinstitute.com. And you can find a place to donate. You can do it through PayPal. You can do it through, you can do it any possible way. You just read there, and there you can even mail in your funds. We even have an address there for you. So that's the MKA Institute, which is hosting today the person who is running the Center for Anti-Racism Research at Temple University. I just want to make that clear. On May the 1st, you can put this down, on May the 1st, hopefully by May 1st, we will have the YouTube streaming at 4 o'clock on May 1st, and that will be Dr. Na Dove. She will be speaking about the book that Dr. Welbeck so wonderfully spoke about, which in my judgment is one of the best books I've ever read, Being Human Being, Transforming the Race Discourse. And there are many reasons to do that, but Dr. Dove knows very well, and she's one of the great minds on this. And so she'll be speaking on that May 1st at 4 o'clock. We will also have the Zoom, just in case we have the problem we had today. The problem we had today hopefully will be fixed on Wednesday. And if that's fixed on Wednesday, then we will be up and streaming, and we will eventually have, hopefully, Dr. Welbeck to come back and to speak to us on our YouTube channel.
Absolutely.
But, so that's May 1st. And I think that's all the comments I have. Dr. Welbeck, do you have anything else to say? You fine?
I just wanted to thank everybody for coming today and hearing the vision for the center. For me, it was important not only to speak to you about the center, but to hear from you. So much of what is happening right now, I want to ensure that the community knows that this is a communal effort. Yes, the Department of Africology is leading this. Yes, this is a Temple University center, but this is going to be a collaborative work if we're going to be successful. And so I appreciate your enthusiasm and your questions. I'd be happy to answer more afterwards or just in future settings and things like that. But ultimately, I wanted to thank again, Dr. Asante and the Institute for hosting me today. I wanted to thank our graduate students, particularly Toyo, for moderating today and helping us navigate our technological challenges as well. We appreciate you and all of the work that you're doing. And I just want to let you all know that we're going to continue working until the work is done. And that is our commitment.
Thank you so much. Hotep, everybody. We thank you so much. Really a wonderful, wonderful program. All right. We'll see you May 1st at 4 o'clock.
See you May 1st.
All right.